March 1987. The Sahara Desert, northern Chad. A column of Soviet-built tanks, part of a billion-dollar arsenal of jets, helicopters, and heavy armor, sits dug in behind minefields, guarding positions one of Africa's most feared dictators considers untouchable. Racing toward them, at over 100 kilometers per hour, pickup trucks, the kind you can buy at a dealership, with machine guns bolted to the back. What happens next is one of the most humiliating military defeats of the 20th century. An army with no tanks is about to destroy an army built on them, and accidentally invent the way wars are fought to this day. This is the story of how a $10,000 truck beats a $1 million tank. This is against all odds. And this is the Toyota War. To understand how pickup trucks ended up charging tanks, you first have to understand the man who owned the tanks, and the empire he believed the desert owed him. By the 1980s, Libya's ruler had spent 2 decades converting oil money into military hardware on a scale few nations on Earth could match. Thousands of Soviet tanks, T-55s, T-62s, some of the newest export armor Moscow would sell. Squadrons of MiG and Mirage fighters. Mi-24 Hind gunships, the flying tanks that had terrorized Afghanistan. On paper, this was one of the largest war machines in Africa, commanded by a man who saw himself as the architect of a new Saharan empire. And directly south of that ambition lay Chad. Chad was everything Libya was not. One of the poorest countries on the planet, landlocked, drought-stricken, and torn apart by 2 decades of civil war. Its army was a patchwork of factions armed with rifles and grudges. If you had asked any military analyst on Earth to rank this matchup, the conversation would have ended quickly. The colonel didn't wait for permission. His forces occupied the Aouzou Strip, a band of borderland desert, and kept pushing south, propping up client factions until Libyan troops and their proxies effectively controlled half of Chad. Air bases were built deep in the occupied zone. Garrisons dug in behind minefields. The conquest settled into something that looked permanent. By 1986, the world had largely stopped paying attention. The strong had taken what it wanted from the weak, the oldest story in geopolitics, presumably already over. If you enjoy the moments where that story breaks, make sure you're subscribed. Because in the deserts the colonel thought he owned, something was about to go very. Seen from Tripoli, Chad looked finished. Seen from the ground, it looked like something else entirely. Because the Chad of 1986 was no longer the fractured patchwork Libya had first invaded. Its factions had largely closed ranks under Hissène Habré, a hard, ruthless, and tactically brilliant leader who understood one thing with absolute clarity. His country could never win the war Libya wanted to fight. No tanks, no air force, no artillery park. Trying to build a mirror image of the Libyan military would take decades Chad didn't have, and money that didn't exist. But Chad had something Tripoli's ledgers couldn't count. Its fighters were drawn from the peoples of the Sahara itself, Tubu and Zaghawa nomads, men raised in the deep desert, who navigated trackless sand seas the way sailors read open ocean. Where Libyan conscripts saw a wasteland, they saw wells, hard ground, dune corridors, and approach routes. The desert wasn't the obstacle between them and the enemy. The desert was home ground. Into this equation came outside help. France and the United States, alarmed by Libyan expansion, began quietly arming Chad, funding, intelligence, and above all the Milan, a French wire-guided anti-tank missile that could kill a T-55 from 2 kilometers away. But crucially, the aid came with a ceiling. No tanks, no jets. Chad would receive weapons, but it would have to carry them into battle with whatever it could drive. And the answer to that problem wasn't sitting in any arsenal. It was parked, by the thousands, in dusty market squares across Africa. The Toyota Hilux and its bigger brother, the Land Cruiser, were never designed for war. They were designed for something harder: surviving Africa. Farmers, traders, and smugglers had spent years proving these machines nearly impossible to kill. Engines that ran on filthy fuel, suspensions that shrugged off terrain that snapped lesser vehicles in half, repairs you could make with a wrench and a prayer in the middle of nowhere. And in the desert, the trucks held one advantage no engineer had intended: weight. A loaded Hilux presses on sand with a fraction of the ground pressure of a 40-ton tank. Where Libyan armor wallowed, bogged, and clung to predictable tracks, a Toyota simply drove. Chad's fighters turned that virtue into a doctrine, strip the truck of everything unnecessary, bolt a heavy machine gun, a recoilless rifle, or a Milan launcher to the bed, pack in a crew of desert veterans. And then, this was the heart of it: never stop moving. No armor plating was added, because armor was the wrong answer to the problem. At over 100 kilometers per hour across open ground, weaving and vanishing into dust, the truck's protection was its speed. You cannot hit what you cannot track. A tank cost over $1 million and moved like a fortress. A gun truck cost around $10,000 and moved like a rumor. In Libyan command posts, intelligence reports about the trucks were read and dismissed. Civilian vehicles, nuisances, technically not even military targets. The colonel's officers, trained on Soviet doctrine, prepared for the war their manuals described: armored thrusts, artillery duels, defended strong points. Nowhere in those manuals was there a chapter on pickup trucks. They were about to learn the oldest lesson in warfare: the most dangerous weapon is the one you refuse to take seriously. January 2nd, 1987. The oasis of Fada, deep in northern Chad. The Libyan garrison here was exactly what Soviet doctrine prescribed. Over 1,000 men, dozens of tanks, and armored vehicles dug into prepared positions, minefields seated across the obvious approaches, and air support on call from bases to the north. A fortress in the sand, the officers inside had every reason to feel secure. The nearest serious Chadian force was believed to be far away, and between them lay open desert that no mechanized army could cross without being seen days in advance. That assessment contained one fatal assumption: that an attacking force would move like an army. The Chadians didn't. Hundreds of technicals crossed the impassable, open erg at speed, navigating by the desert knowledge of men who had lived their whole lives in it. No roads, no predictable axis of advance, no warning. When they appeared at Fada, they appeared from everywhere at once. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. The trucks swarmed the perimeter from multiple directions simultaneously, moving at highway speeds across ground the defenders had classified as untrafficable. Libyan tank crews traversed their turrets toward one dust plume only to find 3 more behind them. A T-55's turret rotates in about 20 seconds. A Hilux at full sprint covers over half a kilometer in that time, while changing direction. The geometry was merciless. Gunners fired at where trucks had been. Trucks fired at where tanks were. And from beyond the effective range of the garrison's return fire, the Milan teams went to work. Braked, aimed, launched, wire-guided missiles streaking across 2 kilometers of open ground into dug-in armor that could not answer. Then the launch vehicles were gone, swallowed by dust, repositioning for the next shot before Libyan artillery could even compute a fire mission. By the time the sun set on Fada, the arithmetic read like a misprint. Dozens of Libyan tanks and armored vehicles destroyed or captured. Hundreds of Libyan soldiers dead. Hundreds more scattered into the desert. Chadian losses: a handful of men and a few burned trucks. Western military observers reviewing the reports assumed at first that the numbers had been garbled in transmission. They hadn't. The garrison hadn't been defeated by superior firepower. It had been defeated by superior physics. Speed against traverse rates, ground pressure against sand, knowledge against doctrine. Every advantage the tanks possessed required the enemy to hold still. The enemy declined. In Tripoli, the colonel was told Fada had fallen to irregulars in civilian vehicles. He refused to accept it. And that refusal was about to cost him far more than one oasis, because Fada wasn't a fluke. It was a formula. The colonel's answer to humiliation was volume. Within days, Libyan jets were striking deeper into Chad, punishing towns and columns in retaliation. Fresh armor and troops rolled south to reinforce the remaining strongholds. The great airbase at Wadi Doum, the garrisons of the occupied north. On the map, the response looked formidable. Underneath it, everything was quietly rotting. Start with the men. Libya's garrisons were filled with conscripts and foreign auxiliaries serving a distant dictator's ambition in a wasteland they feared. Across the lines stood Chadian fighters on home ground, winning and hunting. Morale is invisible on an order of battle, and it was becoming the most lopsided weapon in the theater. Then there was the sky. Libyan air power was the one force that could have made open desert truck warfare suicidal. But France had drawn an invisible line across Chad. Operation Épervier, fighter patrols and air defense systems that made every Libyan sortie south a gamble. The jets still flew, but cautiously, blindly, and less often. The tanks had lost their umbrella without losing a single battle for it. And beneath it all ran the desert's own arithmetic: logistics. Every Libyan position needed fuel, water, and parts hauled across hundreds of kilometers of hostile sand to feed machines that drank by the ton. The Chadians ran on a fraction of that. Light trucks, light needs, captured Libyan supplies, topping up the rest. In the deep Sahara, the side that moves lighter doesn't just march faster. It lives cheaper. It fights longer. Through the spring of 1987, the formula of Fada was applied again and again, and stronghold after stronghold buckled. By summer, nearly all of occupied Chad was free. One target remained, and it wasn't in Chad. Before that target could even be spoken aloud, the reconquest had to finish, and it finished at a gallop. Through the spring of 1987, the technicals ranged across the north like a mechanized nomad horde, striking strong points hundreds of kilometers apart in the same week. In March came the greatest prize yet: Wadi Doum, Libya's fortress airbase in occupied Chad, the very field its bombers flew from. The trucks swarmed it the way they had swarmed Fada, and when the dust settled, Chad had captured an air force it couldn't even fly. Radar systems, aircraft, air defense batteries, and armored vehicles by the hundred. That became the war's darkest joke. Libya was now the principal supplier of the army destroying it. Every stronghold that fell rearmed the victors on the spot. Captured tanks were driven off by their conquerors. Captured fuel-filled Toyota tanks. Captured rations fed the crews racing to the next objective. Like Finland rebuilding itself from Soviet convoys 50 years earlier. Chad was being equipped by its enemy's defeats, and something older than equipment was collapsing too. In the remaining Libyan garrisons, sentries now stared at the horizon in dread. Every dust plume might be them. By August, occupied Chad had effectively ceased to exist. The maps in Tripoli no longer described reality. One name did: Ma'tan al-Sara. Ma'tan al-Sara was not in Chad. That was the entire point. The airbase sat roughly 100 kilometers inside Libya, the sanctuary from which the colonel's jets and gunships staged their strikes south. As long as it operated, no Chadian victory was safe. The war could be rekindled from that runway indefinitely. Conventional logic said the base was untouchable. Attacking it meant invading a vastly stronger nation, alone, with no air cover, across a fortified border, against a target ringed with armor, minefields, and thousands of defenders. In September 1987, Chad decided conventional logic had been wrong about everything else. Why stop now? The raiding force crossed the border and did what no radar operator was told to expect. It came out of the empty quarter, navigating by the old knowledge, moving through the hours when heat haze and darkness blind men and machines alike. There was no artillery preparation, no air support, no second wave waiting. Surprise wasn't part of the plan. Surprise was the plan. The only armor several thousand men in pickup trucks would carry into the heart of an enemy nation. At dawn, the horizon around Matan al-Sara began to move. The technicals hit the perimeter from multiple axes at full speed. The Fada formula executed at its most audacious scale. Defenders who believed they were garrisoning a rear area airfield found themselves in a maelstrom. Gun trucks inside the wire, racing down flight lines, pouring fire into parked aircraft, fuel dumps, radar vans, and control facilities. MiGs and helicopters that had bombed Chad with impunity burned in their revetments without ever starting an engine. The runways themselves were blown into craters. By the time Libyan command understood what was happening, it was over. The raiders withdrew the way they had come, back across 100 kilometers of Libya, leaving the colonel's untouchable sanctuary a field of burning wreckage. Hundreds of Libyan troops were dead or captured. The air threat to Chad had been annihilated at its source. The attackers' losses were a fraction of the defenders, men and trucks spent against an airbase. The shockwave broke something in Tripoli that armor could not fix. Recriminations tore through the Libyan command. The war effort, already bleeding, simply stopped. Within weeks, the colonel, the man who had spent a decade devouring his neighbor, accepted a ceasefire. The Toyota War was over. The final ledger of 1987 read like satire. Thousands of Libyan casualties, hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles destroyed or captured, dozens of aircraft gone, a billion-dollar arsenal gutted, Chad's cost, hundreds of men and trucks it could replace at a dealership. Sit with that arithmetic for a moment. Then ask the question that actually matters. Why? The answer outlived the war, and eventually, it got a name. Years later, in Somalia, aid organizations hiring armed pickup trucks for protection listed the expense in their books as technical assistance. The euphemism stuck. The technical, a civilian truck with a weapon bolted to the bed, entered the global vocabulary, and then it entered every war. Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine, the Sahel. Wherever irregular forces fight, the descendants of Chad's gun trucks are there. So universal that the pickup with a machine gun is now the visual signature of modern conflict itself. But the vehicle was never really the invention. The doctrine was, strip it down. And the Toyota War proved three propositions that keep getting reproven. First, cost asymmetry is a weapon. When your fighting unit costs $10,000 and your enemy's costs $1 million, every exchange, even a losing one, bleeds him faster than you. Second, speed can replace armor. Protection doesn't have to mean surviving a hit. It can mean never being hit at all. Third, swarms beat platforms. Many cheap, fast, expendable units attacking from all directions overwhelm few expensive, powerful ones. Because the expensive machine can only kill one thing at a time. Now look at the wars of today, and tell me what a drone is. It's a technical of the air. Cheap, fast, expendable, swarming, and currently humiliating billion-dollar systems on battlefields your feed shows you every week. The world's richest militaries are relearning in real time the lesson a poor desert nation taught in 1987. Some lessons, it seems, have to be purchased more than once, which is why honesty demands we finish with a warning, because the truck alone explains less than the legend claims. Here is what the myth leaves out. The Toyota didn't win this war. A system did. Desert fighters with generations of terrain knowledge no manual could teach. Leadership that turned that knowledge into doctrine. French air cover that kept Libyan jets cautious. Anti-tank missiles supplied at exactly the right moment. Captured enemy stockpiles that fueled the advance. And on the other side, a command culture so arrogant it dismissed the evidence of its own defeats until the war was already lost. Remove any one of those pieces, and Fada is a massacre in the other direction. Asymmetric victories are never silver bullets. They are systems, and the machine only amplifies the men. Stalin counted tanks in 1939. Hideyoshi counted ships in 1597. Gaddafi counted tanks in 1987. History keeps setting the same exam and keeps failing the students who only count. In the end, The most expensive lesson of the Toyota War cost $10,000. A billion-dollar arsenal measured what Libya had. It said nothing about what Libya understood. About sand, speed, motivation, or the men racing across the Iarg toward its garrisons. The odds measure inventory. They never measure understanding. So here's today's question of the day, and it's a genuine debate. Drones are proving the technicals lesson all over again, right now. Is the age of the tank finally over, or is that lesson being overlearned, the way every death of the tank prediction has failed before? Defend your position in the comments. The best analysis gets pinned. If this story earned your 20 minutes, the like button and a share decide whether stories like this keep getting made. Stay curious, stay analytical. History is never as settled as it seems.